So today I'm going to talk about how a dynasty was established, how the Tudors, like the Tudor dynasty, came to be. And it's going to be all about how Henry VII came to the throne and how he managed to obtain a stable dynasty with control over the nobility. So yeah, I'm going to get started. So before Henry VII came to the throne, there was this whole conflict in England, possibly the first English Civil War, although it's not denominated as that. It's the Wars of the Roses. Well, this was two families called Lancaster. They all stem from Edward III, but two families, the Lancaster and the Lancastrians and the Yorkists, who fought over the control of the crown because some kings, including Henry VI, just seemed weak. There were like a few large battles, no major physical destruction, and the fighting wasn't constant. It was just like periods of fighting throughout the 15th century, like very, very late 14th or like 15th throughout. And so it was open hostility because there were tensions amongst the nobility, and there was violence, weaknesses, and instability. And I just realized that rhymed so much. But yeah, and of course, during this period where nobles and other members of royal families of the royal family were trying to gain control of the crown, the nobles managed to increase their own power. So by 1483, the nobility was way more powerful than it had been ever, because of this power. How do I say that? Power struggle, I guess. They took advantage of it. And why did I say 1483? Because Henry VII only came to the throne in 1485. Well, I'm gonna get into that in a second. Well, before we look at Henry as a king, we have to look at Henry as the person. So he had a claim to the throne. He had actually two relatively weak claims, so not strong enough to be the direct heir, but still he could say, hey, that should be me. Well, his mother's great-great-grandfather was Edward III, but his grandfather was illegitimate. So his really strongest claim came through his mother, but his grandfather was illegitimate. So it's a bit, is it strong? Is it not? It's a bit, And then the grandmother was married to Henry V before Owen Tudor. So that's not a direct link because Edward V, his grandmother didn't stay married to Henry V. I'm guessing Henry V died. So that's not a direct link, but of course he wasn't the grandson of Henry V. So that didn't help. But that also meant that Henry's uncle and father were in fact Henry VI's half brothers. So he did have some family relations to the monarch. Yeah. Well, in 1471, Henry VI and his only son, Prince Edward, died in battle, leaving just 14-year-old Henry as the main Lancastrian heir to the throne. Now, there was still infighting amongst the Yorkists, but the House of Lancaster had been pretty much wiped out, but just leaving Henry. Now, this put Henry in a very vulnerable position. He ran a real risk that someone would go and try and kill him. So Jasper Tudor, his uncle, the Earl of Pembroke, saw this and decided to send him to Brittany in France. He stayed there for a while, 14 years, so he grew up there essentially until he was 28. When he was 28, Edward he was 28, he came back to England and invaded England and became king, essentially, yeah. But meanwhile, while he was still in France, the King Edward IV, Yorkist, he said, okay, fine, you can come to England, you can come here, you can come to England here with Yorkists. But Francis II, the Duke of Brittany, knew that the Yorkists didn't want to really protect Henry, just keep him controlled or even kill him. So he refused. So Henry stayed in Brittany until he was 28, like I said. And literally every other possible Lancastrian heir had died, so it was just him. He was the only claimant to the throne from the Lancaster side. Well, in 1483, like I said, you know how I started saying that everything changed in 1483. No, 1485. Well, in 1483, Edward IV dies, leaving a young child, Edward V, as king, and his brother Richard, the Duke of York. Now, they couldn't leave a child to rule on the throne by itself, so they decided to appoint a regent, Richard, the brother of Edward. Now, Richard, he starts ruling on the behalf of Edward, but he proclaims himself king and kills nephews. Now, these are the princes in the tower, and no one really knows what happened to them, but they were killed. They were just killed. You have to accept that. And this just leads to more this DNA, because people think that Richard is a tyrant. And the reason I said 83 was because Henry saw what was happening, saw the whole Princess in the Tower fiasco, and said, hey, this is the perfect opportunity to launch an invasion, which he did. He managed to gain a lot of support from nobles. Those were unhappy and disgruntled with Richard III, and was even given aid from the French king, who, by the way, was kind of at war with the Yorkists in England, so that was kind of useful, and escaped Brittany. When he arrived to England, he actually arrived in Wales. There's a really famous painting of Henry VII, if it's a painting or a description, Henry VII famously, when he landed on the beaches at Wales, he knelt to the ground and kissed the ground and looked to the sky and said thank you, because he was home. He was where he was supposed to be. And he marched through Wales, and as he walked through, he gained support. He gathered followers and people for his army. And and then marched to the English border. He had a lot of support, but not as much as Richard III had. Richard had hoped, he knew when Henry landed, he'd hoped that Welsh nobles would stop Henry. That didn't happen. So there was this guy, Lord Stanley, with his father, and there was also a guy, William Stanley. I always forget the relationship between those two. Well, these were nobles who were positioned north of this huge battle, which I'll describe in a sec, took place. He had 4,000 men. He was kind of unsure on who to support, because he thought, I want to win. So if I support the winners, I'm gonna win anyway. So he was hoping to win until there was a clear winner and then attack. Now the battle. This was the Bosworth field, famously called Battle of Bosworth. And Richard was actually better positioned, but Henry managed to defeat Richard's forces. Actually, there was this one point where Richard was on the side, he wasn't in the fighting, And then he saw Henry VII, oh, Henry Tudor by this point, with a small group of men, about 100. So he said, hey, I'm gonna go kill him, personally. And those men, hey, come here. And attacked Henry's small force with, again, a small group of men. Lord Stanley saw this and said, hey, we got the two main guys here. The battle was pretty much like a standstill, stalemate. So let's just help one of them. And no one here really likes the Yorkist king. Also, we are family to Lord Stanley because, to Henry, because Lord Stanley was actually Henry's stepfather. But we have kind of loyalty to Henry, so let's just support Henry. And they went with their 4,000 men and defeated Richard's small force. Richard was thrown off his horse and beaten down and killed. And Lord Stanley famously got the crown that had fallen into a bush, because it was on the helmet of Richard, lifted it up and put it on Henry's head. Therefore, declaring the end of the battle and Henry's victory. Well, this is all very good, very beautiful, but yeah, Henry was now King of England. Hadn't been crowned yet, but well, what's his background? Because yeah, this guy just killed the king, but is he really fit to rule? Well, he was a member of the Duke of Burgundy's court, so he knew how to behave in a court. He knew how to handle stuff. He knew how the nobles behaved. So he had an understanding. He could observe court politics as an outsider, because when he was at court, he wasn't directly involved. So he knew how people behaved when they were inside the court politics. So he kind of got treated normally because he knew that people would try to appease the leader, so he kind of knew how to spot that. He was kind of smart. Henry VII was really smart. He managed to be very humble and very formal and keep up a front, even though he was panicking inside. He's like, okay, I'm the King of England, and you're gonna do what I say, and I'm gonna be calm, and you're not gonna be seeing me shouting or screaming, because I'm gonna gain your respect. Well, he thought, problem is, I don't want to be manipulated by people who are just power hungry, who are just going to tell me what I want to hear. So he learned how people treated those in court during his years with the Duke of Burgundy. So he knew what manipulators and what people who just wanted their own gain would do. So he managed to eventually surround himself with only people he could trust. Like I said, he already had a peek of behind the scenes of the court life, so he kind of already knew about that, and because of this, he knew, hey, there's pretenders going around. I have to be careful of that. And his cautious approach to pretenders was basically what saved his life with Simnel and Warbeck. So that was kind of a good thing. Well, so like with this background, we can kind of see how Henry was kind of suited to the throne. Now, well, because when he came to the throne, there were things that would be in his favor and some things that would just be wrong for him. So let's just explore those things. Well, the advantages for Henry was that those beneath the nobles, like the gentry, just were fed up. They're like, I don't want any more war. I just want peace. I don't care who's king as long as they just let me live. I don't want to fight. So the fact that there was this new king that promised stability, fine by the gentry. They didn't have to worry. He didn't have to worry about the gentry not supporting him as long as he kept a stable government, which he did. So that was a good thing. He was a good soldier, a good leader, and those who knew him from before knew he was fit to be king. So he had a lot of support from the start because it's not like he was this irrational guy who just wanted power. He knew how to control it. He knew how to handle it, and you need that in a king, not like what Richard III did. That was kind of a failure. Well, kind of. That was a failure. He was an only child, which it may seem weird to say that this was an advantage to Henry, but the fact that he was an only child meant that he had no family that could pose a rivalry, not only to the throne, but to create factionalism. Because say he had a brother and his brother had no interest in the throne, but he did want lands. Well, he said, "Hey, I'm your bro. Give me some lands." And because of family loyalty, he would have essentially given the lands to his imaginary brother. But because his brother didn't exist, that wasn't a problem. Henry was kind of lucky because by the time he came to the throne, a lot of hostile Yorkist nobles were dead. So, apart from the fact that they would be support, not all of them, but some of the nobles would like him because he wasn't Richard. It meant that he had lands of these nobles that were dead, so had more control, more crown revenue. So win-win. And he managed to punish key rivals. So that was a good thing because he kept them in check. Now, there was also some threats facing Henry when he came to the throne, because, I mean, it's not going to be smooth sailing, it's a new dynasty, so it is facing challenges. For example, first of all, keeping the monarchy itself. He knew from experience that the state of the monarchy was very fragile. In order to establish a dynasty, he needed stability, and he just needed to get that stability, and that was hard to do. The many monarchs before him failed to do so. And that's how he got to the throne. So he didn't want some guy to come up and say, "Hey, give me the throne." Well, he obviously didn't want that, so that was kind of a bit of a threat. Well, he didn't have a direct claim to the throne, so he wasn't a linear king. His claim was really weak, and he didn't have the support and the guaranteed loyalty of those who believed in the divine right of kings. Although some may argue that because he killed Richard in battle, that just proves that God wanted him to be king. But the fact that he didn't have a direct line to the monarchy kind of lost him some support. This woman, Elizabeth of York, she still had sons like the La Pole, and which meant the Yorkist house was still alive. So that was kind of hard, because he knew as long as the Yorkists were still alive and still roaming about, they would pose a threat to him, so he had to be careful. Margaret of Burgundy, which I think in the video I said it was Richard's mother. I was wrong. She was Richard's sister. I always forget. Well, she was Richard's sister and was obviously a Yorkist and obviously supported her brother. So she was obviously against the Lancastrians and obviously against Henry, because who wouldn't be? Come on, this guy killed your brother. You gonna support it? Obviously not. She was a constant pain in the ass for Henry. Constant. If you look at the rebellions and all that, it's essentially just Margaret of Burgundy screwing him over until her death. Just I think it was 5 years before his own death, or 6. But it was like she tried to screw him over every chance she could. Now, yeah, he was king and all. He had won the battle, but would Parliament accept him? Would Parliament recognize him as king? That was the problem. They did, but when he was crowned king, well, when the crown was placed on his head, there was a doubt that would Parliament accept him? Who knew? I mean, obviously they eventually did, but at that moment they didn't know. Also, of course, Henry was faced with this problem. He needed the support of the nobility. He just needed it. So he couldn't treat the nobles too harshly because then he would lose all their support. He couldn't treat them too weakly because then they would take advantage. So he had to find the balance, and that balance is really, really hard. And that's why Henry VII is sometimes called like a tyrant. And I don't think he deserves that name. Also, like I said, there were nobles who would disobey Henry, but some of these nobles were still really loyal to Richard III. So he had to find a way to appease them, find a way to keep them in check, but also keep them happy because he needed their support. He couldn't just ignore them. It's not like he could just lock them in a room or kill them directly and forget about it. He just couldn't. That would be quite political and literal suicide. Also, there was this guy, Edward, the Earl of Warwick, who might just have a claim to the throne, the strongest one. So he has to keep that in mind. So that was a bit of a, what do I do? Well, Henry's like, okay, fine. I'm a new king. I need to establish myself. I'm facing a lot of threats. There's quite a few advantages, so let's just establish a dynasty. Let's get to it. Well, in October 1485, Battle of Bosworth happens on the 22nd of August, 1485, and then in October he officially gets crowned. He gets crowned before Parliament meets, so that no one can say that Parliament gave him the crown. He said he did it himself. So that was a way of keeping Parliament in check, because if he was already king, Parliament can say he couldn't be king. So he just found a loophole and exploited it, and there we go. He also gets married in January 1486 to Elizabeth of York. I mentioned her before. After the coronation, so no one can say that she gave him the throne because he just married a Yorkist and now he was king. Well, no, he married her after, both to show how he gained the throne by himself, but also to join both houses. So any possible Yorkists would be loyal to Elizabeth and, by extension, to Henry. This coronation that was held was huge. It was massive. He spared no expense. He had special coins made. It was huge, and it was a way to symbolize how God and Church approved of Henry VII. All the nobility was made to swear this oath of loyalty. So if they would rebel, it was not only a sin against, a crime against the state, but it was also a sin against God. So, religion was everything these days. So that's why he used this to say, don't be crazy and don't be unloyal, disloyal. Just be loyal to me, because otherwise God doesn't approve. Well, yeah. And then in September 1486, so probably literally 9 months after the wedding, Prince Arthur was born. A male heir. So there you have it. You have a male heir. Right there and then. That's huge for Henry. He's not 1 year into his reign, he already has an heir. That's so good for him. So he just wins right there. And throughout his early years of his reign, especially the first 5, he summons Parliament to, like I said before, after coronation, he goes in this royal process to the north and towards the kingdom. Now, why does he do this? Because, like I said, he knew the dangers these pretenders pose. So, if he went around the country and people saw their king, they would just naturally be like, oh, that's our king, we are loyal to him, no one else. That was his one really good way of controlling the nobility. just going around the country and showing the support he had. He also rewards his supporters. He names, I think, 3 earls during his time on throne across the country, and including John de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, Lord Stanley, the Earl of Derby, and another guy. I don't know. Well, I think he names another one, but I don't have the name here. And these were 2 very loyal supporters across the country, because Earl of Derby and Oxford, not the same place. Then Jasper Tudor, this guy, I mean, he did save Henry's life by sending him to Brittany, so he gets rewarded so much. He gets the Duchy of Bedford in like Wales. He gets John Morton to be Lord Chancellor and Archbishop and Cardinal. He was his new senior member of the church. So if you supported Henry, you'd be rewarded. And it's this whole carrot and stick, policy that he would reward his supporters but punish his not supporters, I guess. Well, this would mean that if you wanted a title, you wanted power, you had to be loyal to Henry, and Henry would reward you. If you were an opponent, however, you wouldn't be rewarded, obviously. Henry was really smart. Really, really smart. I don't think anyone would have thought of this, but he thought, hey, I'm going to predate my reign, starting on the 21st of August, 1485, the eve of the Battle of Bosworth, because therefore anyone who fights in the Battle of Bosworth is fighting against the king. So all the nobles who fought there could be punished. Really, really smart move. It's really smart. He imprisoned those who had strong claims, including the Earl of Warwick. He held him in the Tower of London until 1499, when he was executed. If you were a noble who was suspicious, who Henry didn't really trust you, but didn't have enough proof of your loyalty to imprison you, he would just strip you of your title and your land and everything. But if you were a key family who were essential to the state and Henry couldn't function without you, he would be kind of lenient. He would give you the benefit of the doubt. Well, yeah. So when Henry came to the throne, he faced some problems, obviously. He faced the problem of the nobility, which they were very wealthy and they had a lot of territorial power, which meant they could be potential rivals to the throne. Yet uneven crown control, because in populated areas it was good, but in the Midlands and borderlands it was kind of weaker, and local admin wasn't that good. And then the crown finances were terrible, depleted by the wars. Now, I talk about finances and how he deals with those in my video on if Henry VII was a miser king. So I guess if you're interested in that, go check it out. Yeah. So Henry VII, the way he approached it was to just solve them as they came along. Just if a problem arose, shoot it down. However, he said, I'm not going to delegate that much power to others. Because of course he would want to hold on to power himself, so if he disciplined this guy to solve with any economic problems, this would mean that this guy would have more power and would in the future pose a threat, kind of. Yeah. A potential threat, I guess. So he's like, I'm just gonna keep the power to myself and delegate it only if necessary. Well, he was kind of suspicious naturally. I mean, I would be too. I just killed a king and now I'm king. Well, he was kind of harsh and firm. So people do call him a tyrant king, but it's completely understandable. What I don't get is Henry VIII. Henry VII, I get 100%. And by the end of his reign, at the beginning he was really loved. By the end he was more feared than loved and had this terrible, terrible reputation. Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you how Henry dealt with the nobles, and then about how he dealt with uneven crown control. I'm not going to talk about the finances, like I said, because that I did a video on that. So, yeah. Well, firstly, he depended on the nobles. He couldn't just ignore them because they maintained law and order on areas where they held lands. So you can just say, oh, I don't like you, so I'm just not going to take care of you. Because he would just stop maintaining these lands, he would stop supporting the king, and the king would be screwed. But like I said, the nobility, they had this power. This was 14th century power, but then from the Wars of the Roses, they gained more and more and more power with the depleting power of the crown. So there was this one point where the nobility was almost, if not as powerful as the crown. So that was kind of a problem for Henry. He knew that he could buy support if he rewarded people for their loyalty, and he told them, oh, hey, you're doing a great job. Oh, yeah, I thank you for that. I'm going to give you some reward. He could buy, like I said, buy their loyalty and support. And if they were disloyal, he could just punish them. So he could say, hey, look, if you're loyal to me, here is a reward. If you're not, here is a punishment. You can choose whatever way. A lot of people chose support. And there was like a lot of deaths. The House of Warwick, the Earl of Warwick was a child. The Duke of Buckingham, child. Northumberland, child. So it wasn't that big of a problem because they were just children, and they could take advantage of this through wardships. Well, first of all, one of the main things that Henry VII famously used to control his nobles were attainders. These were the withdrawal of lands and rights because of it's kind of maybe death sentence, but not always. Property is removed, titles removed, and the ability to pass the titles on to your heirs, that was removed. It didn't have to be a death sentence, but an attainder was kind of serious, and this could be done without a trial. So that was kind of a big deal for Henry. He issued a ton of attainders to the people who fought in the Battle of Bosworth, to those nobles that fought for Richard, because he dated the reign before. He could say these were disloyal to the crown. Overall, he issued 138 attainders and withdraws 46 of these, more than Henry IV did. So it just shows that if you're good to him, he may remove some of your punishments. And, I said 138 attainders during the whole reign. 51 of those were in the 5 years between 1504 and 1509. So you can just see the paranoia just taking over him. Like I said, he was prepared to reverse these attainders if nobles showed gratitude. If you showed that you had changed your ways and you would now be loyal to Henry, you could be given your stuff back. However, if you actually wanted the attainder to be reversed, you had to pay. That's Henry. That's how he gets the name Miser King. You literally had to pay for oxygen. You had to pay for so many things. This guy, Sir Thomas Tyrrell, he paid under £2,000 for his father's reversal. £2,000. I'm not saying in today's money. I'm saying back then. That is an awful lot of money just for a title and some lands. For example, this guy, the Earl of Surrey, who was a Yorkist, was imprisoned, and his lands were attained by Henry. But his father had died in battle, the Duke of Norfolk, but Henry managed to never give the title back. He could just, it's not always that he would reverse the attainder, it could just be other things. He could just ignore it, like not reverse it, but like keep it. He could just like give more time, I guess. It's kind of a bit flexible depending on the noble and depending on how Henry was feeling. Then patronage. Well, this was the power to control appointments to office and other right to privileges. Well, he only issued some grants at the start of his reign, only some, because he didn't want to issue too many, because that would just lead to factionalism and rivalry, because he knew he couldn't afford the nobles infighting, and he did what he should have done. He was good at reigning. He decided to only appoint a few guys at the beginning and then leave it. The number of nobles in his reign decreased by a quarter. 25% of nobles who were there, like 25% of nobles disappeared. Through deaths or retainers, their titles were revoked and they no longer held the power, leaving Henry as the powerful one. Yeah. If there was a vacant land because of a death, because of a lack of title, it would just go to the king. So it was a win-win, you know. It was just you give me a title, like you die or you disloyal, I'm gonna take your title. That's how it is. It is what it is. Oh well. Well, if this policy of appeasing the nobles worked, why wouldn't it work on the lower class people? And he tried it out and actually did. He appointed local royal agents in some places, which depended on Henry, not the nobles. So they would feel this loyalty towards him and basically do what he said. And some nobles controlled were, Jasper Tudor. He restored Welsh estates and was rewarded with land. And Lord Stanley, the Earl of Derby, he regained control of Lancashire and Cheshire. And John de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, he became the largest landowner in East Anglia. So Derby is up north, Oxford is in the south. But yeah, this just shows how the patronage, he could appoint the people he wanted and also appease the nobles and control them and keep them in check. Then is the acts of retaining. Retaining is the practice of holding noblemen, keeping men as personal staff. In theory, as servants, but in reality, it's just a small army. Henry obviously didn't want this because he didn't want people to be raising private armies because that's how he did it. And if someone raised a private army and overthrew him, that would not be good. So that's what Henry wanted to prevent. These enforcers could say, hey, you can pay up, otherwise you have to get rid of your men. We're not going to stop you from keeping them, but if you want to keep them, you're going to have to pay up. Which many did. From 1485 to 1504, he did pass a series of laws to make this practice illegal. By 1504, he was so paranoid, understandably because his wife had died, his heir had died. And he actually made the House of Lords and the House of Commons to swear they wouldn't retain men illegally. Which meant that if one of them did, they were under oath, so they could be executed. Win-win. So by 1504, like I said, he passed a few laws to make this practice illegal, and he said, "Okay, fine. You want this? Okay, 100%. I can allow you to retain men. But you have a limit, and if you pass it, completely fine. Don't worry about it, but you are going to have to pay a fine. Just £5 per month per retainer." So that was that added up. If you retained If you retain a lot of men, that would really add up. And of course, you wouldn't be able to pay. So that's what Henry was hoping, that people saw this huge amount of money and said, yeah, I better not retain. Some nobles just managed to find ways to avoid these, but got caught. Like in 1506, this Lord Burgundy, he was fined £70,500 in back then currency, not even today currency. And he managed to divide this between 26 others and scale the payment down, but it just shows how Henry wasn't kidding. And he could have been ruined, so he ought to be loyal to Henry, otherwise Henry would destroy he would destroy him, basically. And then he also kept the nobles in check through financial controls. Through two main things, like bonds and recognizes. Bonds were written agreements. So, for example, Henry wanted a certain noble to promise a certain thing. Now, the noble in writing officially stated this and then said, if I don't do this in blah 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 amount of time, I have to pay you. And then the recognizes were an acknowledgement of a debt that already existed. For example, like if you have to pay more if this wasn't met. Say that you had told the king you would do blah blah blah, and the time came and you didn't do blah blah blah. Henry would say, fine, I'm not going to bond you again because you already have that. I'm going to give you recognize. I'm going to tell you that you have this debt, you're going to have to give it to me, and you have no choice, and you're going to have to pay an even larger fine. And that just increased economic strain on the nobles, helped secure his position with the nobles because they were afraid to be fined. So, yeah. Now, he managed to raise money from untrustworthy sources and said, yeah, you're going to have to be in my favor if you want to stay afloat. So just be loyal to me and no one else. And this surprisingly worked. He established the Council Learned in Law, which was quite clever. This was a way to establish Henry as a feudal landlord, meaning that all economic matters relating to the crown lands and forced payment of debts had to go through this and were controlled and went to Henry. So it was an organized way of keeping tabs on the economy, which really worked. I mean, Henry didn't face that many economic troubles. He didn't run out of money. So that was good. And then if you wanted to be a judge, if you wanted to work in legal matters, in order to say you want to be a judge because you are completely against all the retaining acts and all the bonds and recognizes, fine. No one's stopping you. Just get legal training. And yeah, the judges that were eventually appointed were quite fierce. No one really liked them. And yeah, that is how Henry dealt with the nobles. Then is how he dealt with the new and crown control. So, for example, in local government, he relied on a network of officials to help control the crown. For example, he settled justice of the peace, JPs, which were normal gentry level people, and they were appointed by local landowners, and there were several per county, and these were responsible for public order, and checking the laws were being implemented and were dispensing justice. And they actually had meetings called quarter sessions, which would deal with serious crimes. But I mean, obviously, if treason came up, that would go straight to Henry. And this was a way of keeping the nobles in check, because kind of the nobles, because to keep crown control, because the gentry now had a lot of power, and the gentry would be faithful to Henry, so be loyal. And the nobles saw this and weren't happy because now it wasn't only them who controlled local areas. Also, if you didn't have nobles in an area, it would be kind of hard to control. That's why you need JPs. In London, obviously it's going to be controlled, but in who knows what village, there's not enough nobles there to keep control. And if you just appoint a JP, you're going to have a foothold in that place. Important people appointed to local government were Jasper Tudor in the Welsh Council. Jasper Tudor was in everything. He was literally everywhere. And he actually appointed Arthur, who was honorary charge in local government because he was just a child. If you were actually a noble in the English-Welsh border, you had some special privileges, for example, keeping control, and you would get extra incentive to do your job well. That was increased loyalty. In Durham, Richard Fox, he stays there, and in the north, his mother is controlling most admin, Elizabeth Woodville. Now, having people he trusts controlling these areas, that's perfect for him because it's just people he knows they're not gonna betray him, so it's a win-win. Then that's the local level, and national level. Well, he thought, I can't be meeting with Parliament a lot because otherwise, A, I'm gonna look weak. B, I'm gonna give too much power to Parliament. So he only called them a bunch of times, only really to pass laws for the king, and only a few weeks at a time. You can have a long Parliament, like the long Parliament which lasted 11 years. Now he can have that. So he just had short parliaments, relatively short parliaments, just to deal with specific issues, and then if another issue arose, another parliament would be called. Probably waited until there was a bunch of issues to just discuss it in one, because again, he didn't want to call parliament too often. Then if you wanted to if you were in Henry VII England, you would notice how there were a ton of proclamations and decrees, and the vast majority of these were issued by the king. So it was a form of direct rule, not just appointing ministers. It was just him giving the people orders, including through Parliament. And a Parliament actually he used this to support controversial policies like tax rise, limitation of power of the nobles. Not anything too crazy. Like everything came from the monarch after all. But he didn't want to give Parliament very important issues because otherwise they would gain power and possibly be a threat. He had to find that balance. And Parliament was just named a call to keep nobles in control and further Henry's own interests. And it meant if the monarch wanted, they can just assemble themselves. Just if Henry wanted Parliament to be called, he would call it Parliament. He also had royal councils, for example, loyal supporters who would give him advice on normal tasks, but also day-to-day management. So that was a way of, making sure you have the right people to help you rule, because you don't want to be inexperienced, and you want to make sure everyone's happy, because if they're not happy, they could rebel. The membership in these royal councils was small, around 227, which seems quite a lot, but consider how many people live in England. I think at this point, in London alone, it's 60,000, which is nothing compared to today, but he needed a short bunch of people who would help him and counsel him on what he should do. And it turns out that these small committees were overall more significant than Parliament in passing policies, because these were trusted members of the King's Court who would do basically what the King said. And there was this thing called the Star Chamber, which would prosecute anyone who would act in a rebellious manner or would just go against the king directly. But yeah, that is it. That is the way Henry VII dealt with nobles, and how he successfully established a dynasty that would go on to last until right at the beginning of the 17th century. And if you think about it, kind of also up until the 18th, because the Stuarts are descendants of Henry VII. The Hanoverians definitely aren't, but the Stuarts are. And yeah, that is it. It just shows how he was really smart about his establishment to power. He knew how to handle people and did so effectively. And yeah, he didn't handle it bad at all. He was actually really good. So yeah, that is pretty much it. I'm going to end this now because I don't know what else to say. But yeah, thank you for watching.